Hey guys, it's Dr. Justin Marcagiani here. Today we're going to do a quick live Q&A. Really excited to kind of dive in, see if you have any questions about various health topics, and I'm really looking forward to kind of expelling any health myths that are out there as well. So one of the first topics I'm going to just bring up today, kind of while we riff and some questions come in, is cholesterol. Cholesterol, I think, is an important topic. We'll kind of dive in on that in a second. Before we do, smash that like button. Really helps the search algorithm. Put your comments down below. Let me know about the different thoughts on the topics that we're going over here tonight. All right, so cholesterol is a big topic I deal with all the time because conventional medicine folks tend to have people brainwashed on the idea that any high level of cholesterol, or high, essentially over 200 mg per DL, is a problem. And cholesterol is really an important nutrient. It's an antioxidant, very powerful. It's actually a building block of all your major hormones. A lot of antioxidant properties, very healing. Really, the question is, cholesterol only becomes a problem when there's excess inflammation in the body. There's some small variations like hypercholesterolemia. That's a rare genetic issue when your cholesterol is way above 300. And usually there's some genetic risk in the family. That may be a little bit different of an issue, but most people, that's not the case. The biggest driving factor of cholesterol is consuming too much trans fats and rancid, junky fats, right? And then also insulin. Insulin's a huge driving factor of increasing cholesterol. So like my cholesterol right now, it's about 170, 175. So not even that bad at all. And I eat lots of protein, lots of fats, tablespoon of coconut oil in the morning, tablespoon of butter, collagen, right? I try to keep my carbs, more on the lower side unless I'm more active. But fat and cholesterol don't really touch your body's own production because 95% of what your body makes for cholesterol is internal. It's not what you're putting in, it's 95 what you make. Now, I've had vegan patients with cholesterol in the 300s, and partly because vegan diets tend to be very high in carbohydrate, thus stimulating insulin, thus the insulin driving up a lot of cholesterol production. So when it comes to cholesterol, we got to look at it a couple ways, right? So the first thing is, what's the whole milieu look like? Is there a lot of inflammation in the vasculature? So first thing we can do is just look at the overall diet. Are we consuming a lot of processed sugar, excess omega-6 junky oils like canola, safflower, soy? Are we doing a lot of trans fat, hydrogenated oils, margarine? I can't believe it's not butter, kind of junk stuff. Then we may, processed sugar, those kind of things. The next thing we may look at is inflammation markers. That could be things like C-reactive protein, HSCRP. We want it below 1. We may look at things like homocysteine, which are inflammatory metabolites that flow between the vasculature. And these metabolites are inflammatory on the blood vessels, and they typically happen with inadequate levels of B vitamins, especially folate, B12, B6. So that's an important issue. So if your diet's really poor or you're getting lots of junky B vitamins from like orange juice and bread, that can be a problem, right? And so you can see poor nutrition tends to drive a lot of these issues. And then, of course, like fibrinogen would be another one. You could also look at D-dimer. This looks at clotting in the blood. So the more clotting you are, the more clots build up. Of course, there could be an occlusion, thus a heart attack in the heart, stroke in the brain, right? Clot in the lung, pulmonary embolism. But either way, you can at least look at the inflammatory markers to get a sense that, are you moving in that direction? You can also look at fasting insulin, right? Fasting insulin below 7, below 5 ideally would be ideal. And then ideally, I would say on top of that, really making sure that we have insulin ideally below 7, below 5, and we're keeping our inflammation pretty low. I mean, that's I think a really important standard thing out of the gates. Now, when it comes to lipids, cholesterol by itself isn't that big of a deal. Of course, there's particle size that goes into lipids, into your cholesterol. That's never looked at, and statin medications will not touch that. So you primarily have particle size A and B. A is good, like you want an A on your test, B for bad. Now, what tends to drive A is going to be high quality, good animal saturated fats. And so that's going to be things like egg yolks, grass-fed meat, good quality fish, like good, healthy animal fats, right? And what's going to drive coconut oil, avocado, some of the monos like avocado, olive oil. And then what's going to drive a lot of the excess B cholesterol particle size. B smaller, can get into the fissures in the endothelial tissue, create inflammation, create foam cells, which kind of block the arteries. You have particle size B are going to be driven by a lot of your omega-6 oils. So your safflower, your corn, your canola, right? Your cottonseed, These are your junky omega-6, of course, all your trans fats, and then a lot of excess carbohydrate, grains, refined carbohydrate. That's what's going to drive that. And so we can a lot of times just look at where your diet's at, and I can kind of tell 90% of the time you're going to be in this direction because your diet looks really great, right? You're having eggs for breakfast, you're having pasture-fed meat, you're having some salmon at dinner time. That looks really good. Your carbs are in check. But we can always run a particle size test. And then, of course, HDL is good because HDL will actually go up with good high quality saturated fats. And HDL, it's not a good or bad cholesterol. They say that, right? But it's really not. HDL stands for high density lipoprotein. So in and of itself, it's actually a protein. It's not a cholesterol. But think of it really as a bus. It's the protein that carries the cholesterol. And HDL is the bus that goes from the school back to home, ideally, or it goes from the arteries, the body, back to the liver. The liver is the home. And so it brings that cholesterol back from the body to the liver to recycle it. And so as long as you have good transportation of bringing that cholesterol back to where it's going, not a big deal because we're not leaving that and letting it deposit all throughout the body. The body's putting it out there. It's helping to heal, recover, and then it's bringing it back to recycle it. So not a big deal. And then, of course, we may look at triglycerides, which are going to be part of the lipids that go up with carbohydrate and insulin. So if you have very high levels of trigs and lower HDL from not consuming good fats, that could be a problem. So we want that under 2-to-1. So ideally, it's like trig at 100, HDL at 50. That's 2-to-1, right? 100 over 50 is 2. So that's kind of our max. And so we want it even less than that would be ideal. So trig to HDL, 2 or less is ideal. And so these are some good things we can look at. HDL or total cholesterol over HDL under 4, 3.5 is ideal. So you could have essentially 250 on the cholesterol, right? But have your HDL around 50, and that's about what, 5 or so. That may be a tiny bit high, but if you're at 55 or 58, that's not bad. The low 4s. Most of my patients that I see with following my dietary recommendations, their HDL to total cholesterol ratio is typically in the mid 3s, which is good. I had a patient today with cholesterol at 250, but her HDL was at 110. So she was really recycling it super, super well, which is good. So it's good to look at the ratios, the type of cholesterol, the pattern. It's good to look at the trig to HDL ratio. It's really important to look at the big 4 inflammatory metabolites. Insulin's important because it stimulates that HMG CoA reductase enzyme that makes cholesterol. Homocysteine, CRP, fibrinogen, or you can throw in D-dimer with that. So these are your good markers. So if you're concerned, these are important things to look at. And there's other markers like LP little a, apolipoprotein E, VLDL. I mean, these are ancillary. LDL particle number, they're okay as well. I kind of look at the core stuff, and then you can narrow it down. Those are the core things. For the most part, when lipids go awry, it's due to excess inflammation, consuming poor fats, too much carbohydrates, junky trans fats, inadequate levels of B vitamins, inadequate levels of important nutrients like vitamin A, vitamin E, vitamin D. But if your diet's great and you're doing good with supplements, those shouldn't be a problem. Question here from Rashawn. I'll put it up here. Hey, Rashawn, hope you're doing well. Does high LDL and low HDL mean the tissues are consuming more cholesterol? Potentially, yeah. I mean, well, it depends. Low HDL is bringing it back, and high LDL. So it just depends on kind of where your trigs are at and where your inflammation's at. So it depends, right? So I want to know where your CRP's at. So I want to know numbers. So like, let's say your HDL is at, 40, and your LDL is at over 200. Potentially. Yep, potentially. I don't look at it like that though. I just make sure the ratio is good. And if something's out of balance, I just try to make sure it's not out of balance due to inflammation. And then I try to make sure your diet's not jacked up on poor fats, excess omega-6s, too much sugar, too much grains, and inflammatory foods. And so essentially triglycerides, you have glucose in your body and or fructose, your body will start to convert a lot of those sugars and carbohydrates typically into triglycerides. That's what tends to happen with trigs. So you have cholesterol in your body. Your cholesterol is going to get used by your body. They're going to get transported into micelles, which get transported throughout the body. And then you have your LDL, which go from out to the liver to the body, and then HDL back from the body to the liver. And your trigs are typically going to be the parts of the carbohydrate, typically that get converted into fat. Good questions there. Is it true that if you're healthy and you eat a meal, it shouldn't affect your energy, ideally make you tired or give you energy? It depends. I mean, ideally, a good meal should give you energy. That's ideal. That'd be nice. I would say two things affect the meal, and you can see it on Thanksgiving. Just the size of the meal. Just eating a bigger meal can make you tired. That's one. So just too much food make you tired. They say the tryptophan on the turkey, yeah, but it's not so much where it should make you tired. Typically, it's the size of the meal, and the next thing is carbohydrate. Lots of carbohydrate increase insulin. Insulin increases lipogenesis. Lipogenesis means fat storing, right? Lipo fat, genesis formation. And that's a very energy depleting process. So if you're making a lot of fat, that can make you make you very tired. And then of course, if you're having a reactive hypoglycemic issue and you eat too much carbs, your blood sugar can also crash, and that can cause you to get tired or shaky or jittery or anxious. So those are all potential possibilities there. So hope that helps. But in general, yeah, I mean, a meal is going to have protein. A meal is going to have fat. As long as you can break that fat down, it shouldn't overly make you tired or bloated or gassy. So assuming you have good digestion, good fats on board. If you're really active, of course, some carbohydrates or starch or veggies, of course, is going to be helpful. Veggies tend to be more helpful on the micronutrient side. But if you're really active, a little bit of extra starch can provide some good energy as well. Can you talk more about omega-6 and how they can be damaging? So omega-6 in general are going to feed down the prostaglandin E2 pathway. Prostaglandin E2 is an inflammatory pathway. Okay. And so you have prostaglandin 1, 2, and 3. 1 and 3 tend to be more anti-inflammatory. 2 is going to be more inflammatory. Now, on the inflammatory side, you also have meats can go down the pathways of arachidonic acid, which can be a little bit inflammatory as well. But good meats are going to have like fat-soluble vitamins A, D, E. Also, if you're eating like grass-fed meat, you're going to get GLA fat. You'll even have some omega-3s in there. These are all really good anti-inflammatory fats. And then, of course, if you're getting like, more neutral fats like coconut oil, pretty neutral, monounsaturated like avocado or olive oil, as long as it's not damaged or oxidized and it's cold pressed, that should be fine too. And so, of course, your cell membranes get remade by a lot of the fat you have. And if you look at omega-6s, what the omega-6 means, it talks about how many double bonds there is in the fat. So an omega-6 has 6 double bonds, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And the more double bonds you have, if you take an organic chemistry class, the more double bonds you have, the more unstable the fat becomes. So when you put a double bond in there, it makes the fat more rigid. So when you look at the chemical molecule of it, when you have single bonds, so it's a hydrogen, single bond, carbon, single bond, carbon, single bond, carbon, and you have hydrogens on the either sides. The single bonds are like way more flexible, right? Way more flexible. The carbons are essentially saturated, right? So you have a carbon, and then at the end you have hydrogen, 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 and then in between you have carbon, hydrogen, hydrogen. So it's saturated. There's 4 bonds at every single spot in the carbon molecule. When you put double bonds, now it becomes less. It's not saturated, it's unsaturated. Therefore, why it's an unsaturated fatty acid. And the double bond makes that carbon molecule less flexible. Okay, less flexible. Now, the next thing you can look at is whether it's in cis or trans formation. So the hydrogens, this is cis formation, hydrogen up, right? And the fat actually becomes more rigid, but less oxidizable when it goes into transformation. So one hydrogen's up top, the other one flips down. So it's hydrogen, hydrogen. So instead of like a field goal where it's good, you have one hydrogen, and that makes the fat more rigid, more inflexible, but gives it longer shelf life. So that's why they will go and take fats through a process of hydrogenation where they pump in hydrogens. That flips the hydrogens, makes them go hydrogen here, hydrogen down. That's trans. Cis is both the same way. Trans is the opposite. That's the molecular formation, and that causes it to have longer shelf life and not get as oxidized, or I should say, at least not taste as oxidized. Essentially, the fact that it's been made into a trans fat, it's going to be not good. It's going to be really bad. And it makes your cell membrane super hard and rigid and not flexible. So we want like good quality animal fats, saturated fats. We want good healthy fats because they're less likely to be oxidized and broken down. And they're way more flexible. And then good healthy cell membranes are really important. And so that's important overall there. Okay. What do you suggest for immediate relief from hiatal hernia? I mean, there's exercises you can do where you drink some water, have your arms up, and then drop back on your heels. So essentially, hiatal hernia. Here's your diaphragm. Here's your esophagus. Here's your stomach. Essentially, my fist here. and essentially your stomach's starting to come above your diaphragm, right? And so here's my diaphragm. It's now below my stomach. And now why is that the case? And so you can do different exercises. You can have your chiropractor come in there and work on that. That's really helpful, but that may not fix the root issue. So most of the time there's inflammation in the stomach, some from food allergens, inadequate levels of stomach acid or enzymes, or H. pylori infection. So you want to get that under control. You can have a good massage therapist kind of work it, kind of calm down any adhesions, pull the stomach down. Typically when you breathe in, that puts the diaphragm down, right? Because your lungs are up here, right? And so when you breathe in, diaphragm down, and then when you breathe out, diaphragm comes back up to push the lungs, right? So that brings the diaphragm down. And the whole idea is when you breathe back out, you essentially hold the stomach. So you're kind of creating this traction force, right? And that's how you would pull that diaphragm down. But you got to get to the root cause. Why are you having this hernia? So you do all the different diet and lifestyle things. You reduce the inflammation. You can do some of those techniques, banging on your heels, pulling that apart, and that can be helpful. May not fix the underlying issue, but it's a good start. A question here. I have GERD. It comes up and causes a regular heartbeat for hours. How do you stop that? I mean, the first thing is get your digestion better in the stomach, right? Avoid the bad foods. Get good enzymes and acids in there. Make sure you're chewing your food up. Make sure the food allergens are good. Make sure you're not overly hydrating. That's a good first start. And then after that, you can go look at addressing any bugs that could be there, like H. pylori or SIBO or SIFO. These are all, good options. Again, got to run here, guys. If you enjoyed today's video, give me a thumbs up, put your comments down below. And again, if you want to reach out, because if you have more health issues that you want to dive in deeper on, there'll be a little link below where you can schedule the consult with myself and my staff, and we are here to help. If you guys enjoyed it, thumbs up and share with family and friends. Take care, y'all. Bye now.